Great. My name is Russ Altman. I'm with Kathy. I'm the co-PI of the Stanford UCSF or UCSF-Stanford CERSI. We've been having a great partnership for more than 7 years. And this is the panel entitled Generative AI in Regulatory Science. I'm a faculty member at Stanford in Bioengineering, Genetics, and Medicine. The goals of this panel, we're very excited. So AI has been a thing, as many of you may have noticed. The goals are to understand the potential benefits, risks of LLMs in regulatory science, understand a little bit about the state of the art, both on the regulator side and the sponsor industry side, and then kind of start a conversation, which is how do we evaluate this? How do we evaluate it, its impact on regulatory decisions, its impact on the companies, its impact on the FDA. Just a little story. So I have a CERSI project with the Office of Generic Drugs, kind of prototyping LLMs to help kind of create a co-pilot for FDA reviewers who are looking at applications. And it is eye-opening. So what are some of the initial contributions that we've made? Math is important and not always the strength of some of the but when you're calculating maximum tolerated dose, you care about getting that math right, or the maximum recommended dose, things like half-lives and whatnot. So math is an issue. These, if you've ever been involved in one of these applications, there are lots of tables, and tables are not always the easiest thing to interpret for an LLM, even for a human, and definitely for an LLM. So there's a lot of technical stuff. I had one other one, which is, the technical vocabulary of drug development and drug evaluation is not always obvious or easy. So anyway, and this is not ready for prime time, but we're excited to be developing this tool. I also know that my colleagues in industry are very carefully, and you'll hear about this in a few minutes, thinking about and using LLMs for the creation of these applications. So I love to, at night, think about the idea that LLMs will be writing the drug applications, LLMs may be helping or reviewing the applications, and so there'll be a question about what is the contribution of humans to this process. And I say that with tongue in cheek, but there are real issues there. So I'm really excited with Rahul to have organized this committee, and I'm going to throw it over this panel. I'm going to throw it to Rahul, and then we'll hear from our panelists. We'll have a little bit of a discussion among the panel, and then we're definitely going to have a Q&A for 17 minutes, I think.
Thank you, Russ. Okay, so just by way of background, I'm a researcher at OpenAI. I work on health, bio, and science. But before this, I was on faculty at the University of Calgary. I was an infectious disease epidemiologist. My group did really big systematic reviews and meta-analyses as its bread and butter. And I ended up moving over to OpenAI into this industry because mostly I saw the ridiculous rate of progress, these signs of transformation to come, and also the value of helping to steer and shape the development of this technology. I want to talk briefly about the rate of AI progress. Most of you will have used ChatGPT, but I want to just talk about what has happened in the time since then and now. ChatGPT was a bit of a watershed moment. The models have kept getting better since then, both for intellectual use cases and in terms of their raw reasoning, but also in terms of their practical utility. There's a benchmark, GPQA. It's a graduate level benchmark that is meant to be Google proof. So the answers can't be Googled. Experts in some other domain who are very smart aren't able to answer the question with a half an hour of Googling. A year and a half ago, that benchmark, we were a chance. Today, we match human expert level performance. And by we, I mean industry rather than OpenAI per se. There's another benchmark, SWE-bench, which is a software engineering benchmark, fixing bugs in real-world code. We've gone from 4 to 72% as an industry in a year. And it's not just these sorts of benchmarky use cases. There's a tool called Elicit that is very good at automating many parts of systematic reviews, what I used to do for my day job. In some ways, that has been, that is more and more looking like it's going the way of automation. And these tools I find really, really useful to me, not just in writing boilerplate, but in the facts of my day-to-day work. And overall, what this leaves me to think is that we have a bit of an evaluation and deployment overhang, and that is increasing over time. And what I mean by that is that these models are getting more and more capable. They're getting capable very quickly. Figuring out how to evaluate these models and think about their deployment is costly and takes time. And that work is harder, more costly, more time-consuming for the bigger tasks and the more independent tasks that these models are increasingly capable of. And so this feels like a real opportunity for us to figure out how to do that well and how to evaluate and deploy tools like this in these increasingly high-stakes settings as their capabilities become even more substantial. And so I look forward to discussing with the panel what that might look like in this particular really important, really high-value setting.
Thank you very much. So the way this is going to work is we have asked each panelist to do a 5-minute framing set of comments. Then we'll have a discussion, and then we'll have Q&A. So that's the general run. I want to introduce the panel all at once right now, and then we'll just go right down the line pretty much. It'll be Mark, Liang, and Janet, just to remind everybody. Mark Taisey is at Amgen, where he's a Senior Vice President of Global Regulatory Affairs and Strategy. Liang Zhao is a new professor of bioengineering and therapeutics at UCSF, but was formerly at CEDAR, where he was a director of Division of Quantitative Methods. And then finally, Janet Woodcock is a private citizen, but a former FDA deputy commissioner, CEDAR director, CBER before that, and acting commissioner for a little while. So we'll get 5 minutes each, kicking off with Mark.
Okay, it's on. Thank you. So I've been in regulatory for 35 years, and I remember when I used to go into the file room and I have to stamp page by page, and we used to have these huge file rooms. About 15 years ago, I always thought we could automate a submission to health authorities. I wanted this one-button solution. As soon as the data was available, I push the button and it goes out to all the countries in the world, and health authorities can start reviewing it. Well, the technology wasn't there yet. But the technology is starting to be there, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the journey that my company has been on in terms of automating the regulatory content that goes into our submissions. And I'll talk about 2 submissions. I'll talk about an original BLA, what we're doing now, and I'll talk a little bit about what we do with CMC post-approval changes. So for BLAs, at Amgen, it takes about 26 weeks from database lock to filing an application. So that's half a year when we know the data, we know the results, and we haven't even got the application to health authorities yet. The amount of time that we could save in getting our patients our drugs faster, we can get rid of that time from that 26 weeks from database lock. So what we've been doing is we've been taking AI and looking at generating all documents in the submission using AI. First, we use structured content management for some of the issues that were raised earlier in terms of pulling from tables or actually doing mathematical reasoning. And then we take that and we convert that and we have AI. So currently, we've finished working on clinical study reports. We now have that fully automated. That takes us about 6 weeks when we're doing it standard to actually generate a clinical study report. We can actually do it in 2 to 3 days now. We've also completed the quality of summary, which also summarizes all of the CMC section of the application. And we now can do that. Again, that took about 6 weeks. We can do that within a day now because AI can able to pull all the sections from the submission, actually make a application out of that. So because of that, we now have gotten our applications from database lock to filing. We're down to about 12 weeks now. We're now working on the summary document, which is a bigger challenge for AI to do because you got to make conclusions and summaries in those documents. And we hope to have those completed by the mid of this year. We believe we can bring that time frame down to 10 weeks. And further automating the rest of the submission, we believe we can bring that down to about 8 weeks. It's not quite the one-button solution where you can push the button, it goes out to all the countries in the world, but 8 weeks is pretty good. And that's our target, and we hope to achieve that by the middle of next year. The second submission that we do a lot of is post-approval changes in the CMC. That takes a sponsor, if you have changes, making improving your process, making a better product. It takes about 5 years to get that approved around the world, from first country to last country. And while you're doing that, you have to carry inventory. You can't get a better product to the patient. That's a long time to wait. Now, we are using reliance mechanisms with cloud-based platforms such as Accumulus that allows us to submit to countries around the world at the same time. They can use a so-called rapporteur that can look and approve the product. They can share those reviews through the Accumulus platform, and we expect approvals to go from that 5 years down to less than 1 year around the world based on using reliance mechanisms and a cloud-based platform. So those are some of the things that we're doing at Amgen, of using AI and other technologies to automate the process to allow us to get the submissions to health authorities quicker and allow patients to get the drugs faster.
Thank you so much. Liang?
Yeah, first of all, really an honor to be a panel with Dr. Dan Woodcock and Mark. I have been a modeler for more than 30 years. Out of in China, the first group of people doing mathematical contesting modeling. Then I joined the industry first as a consultant, then drug R&D. I've written personally some BLA packages, and I have worked on some NDA packages. Then joined FDA first in the new drug side started from scratch as the reviewer of clinical pharmacology, then team leader for pharmacometrics covering oncology, rheumatology, pulmonary, inflammation. Then Office Generative Drugs established the division for quantitative method modeling that I joined there. So out of the work, we did push out the pilot meeting for model integrated evidence, launched last year, not last year anymore, 2023 October. And then we also advocating model master files as a way to share knowledge, including AI, everything. So I just want to share literally a little bit of mental journey when I joined FDA as a reviewer. So initially, I just found it's overwhelming. It's not only about science, it's about legal, regulatory, everything. I'm glad to have a chance here to tell Dr. Dan Woodcock sometimes I have to close my eyes before sending out an email because there are so many knowledge need to be integrated. First of all, you need to read the full NDA or BLA package with the truckload information. Usually that's the case, even in year 2009. Then when you make a decision, you need to consider the regulatory side of the things, what the previous communications, what the therapeutic area you are in. So what are the pitfalls? What are the evolving regulatory thinking on this issue? All those things not written in the book, not written in the package, you have to figure out by yourself. Also, there are some legal aspects. For example, so what clinical studies will qualify marketing exclusivity? What the patent? All those things you need to keep in mind. You also need to have a good strategy to voice your opinion with other disciplines. I think a part of the job is to for agreement and for disagreement resettlement, lots of things. So I hope those information can be handled by AI. It's really not be trained by work, but when you think about the regulatory reviews, we talk about question-based review, issue-based review. Mainly if you pose a question, it's more like a chatbot. I'm glad that some open AI colleagues here. So what the ADME property of the drug, what the risk-benefit profile. So I think AI can immensely help the reviewer and the decision makers to be feeling comfortable when you give out some recommendations. So you can also easily collect information from other applications, other drugs, to increase consistency and efficiency, productivity. and as well as quality for sure. So that's the experience I have. I think AI is fully fit for those type of jobs. I wish that in the future, this is my wish. I heard from Mark about the automation of review, the protocol writing, the study report, or those things. There are lots of applications in the drug development side, but another layer of things AI can really benefit the regulatory science is also the regulatory workflow, regulatory knowledge integration. I believe behind each word, the AI do have the capability to digitize all the knowledge, hidden knowledge, when people make decisions and make connections. This is much better than human, than experienced scientists, I would say. So also in the future, I think Dr. Woodcock probably have better ideas how to modernize the regulatory workflow. But I hope that when Ross mentioned that we are automating the reviews, I think AI can really help the both industry and the FDA reviewers to write the proposal, design the trials, automate the study report, automate the review, and we can spend more effort on the strategic side, what the boundaries we can break, what the new advancement we can make. Those things we can have more energy and time to do with leveraging the benefit of using AI. Also, can we do everything real time? If the data generated from clinical trials, if it's locked, then can it be uploaded to the cloud? And the moment the data unlocked, you see a report. Both the industry and the FDA people can have access to that in the real time. So those things are down the road in the future. That's pretty much I want to share at this moment.
Thank you. Janet?
All right, so first of all, let me say I'm doing a project with AI that's unrelated to the FDA, but I just wanted to put that out there that I am involved in that. So how could this be used? First of all, and thank you, Dr. Zhao, for setting this up. The FDA's always had a terrible problem with knowledge management, an excruciating problem. And it's a problem for academia and regulatory science as well, because nobody can figure out what went on, even if you leave aside the confidentiality barriers that keep a lot of that information from going out there. And one of the things that we often, as humans, what we do is we have legacy processes and procedures that we stick with and we follow, even though times have changed. And so, FDA struggled on how to do knowledge management and should we have keywords and make people write them down. They're not going to do stuff like that, right? So what do I think? If we step back, okay, the concern about AI is human judgment. Is it a substitute for human judgment? Okay, so I'm not going to answer that question. I don't think so right now, and I don't think we should worry about that. I think we ought to have it as a substitute for human busy work. Why? Why do you write all this stuff down? Why can't we have data in and data evaluated? Why do we have to write deathless prose? So the industry writes a large amount of deathless prose, which basically makes it very hard to figure out what happened without doing a very large amount of reading, okay? Because what do you do that from? Okay, you have the protocol, you have protocol amendments, you have what happened, deaths and injuries, you have all those data points, then you write it into some kind of script and write a very long. And then what happens? It's submitted to the FDA. What do the FDA people do? You know what they do, okay? They write deathless prose, okay? They write, clinical reviewers write all the clinical studies up and blah, blah, blah. And then the clinical pharmacology reviewers write it all up. And then the statisticians write it all up. And then the toxicologists write up much of what is done. And that's long. And the question is, what were the issues? What within all this it needs human judgment, right? So basically, I worked on the Accumulus project to get that launched because, okay, the cloud might provide us an environment where you could have the data elements, structured data elements, transfer them, have the regulatory people have their own segment, it's firewalled off, but look, transfer the data in and then deal with the data. But this is what we have is the legacy of show your work. It's like high school, okay? You have to write it all down to show that you did all this stuff. And so, I think there's tremendous opportunities for improvement. Now, on the CMC side, that's manufacturing, is true. The requirement for submitting changes in how you make a drug or biologic to 150 different regulatory agencies, if in fact, you've submitted, you're approved in that many regions, is a huge barrier to manufacturing innovation. As you well know, or many of you know, pharmaceutical manufacturing, especially small molecules, is still in the dark ages, okay? They still do unit operations, grinding it up and this and that. And, but who would change anything when it takes you 5 years and 150 submissions to change it? So I've been when I was at the agency, I worked with Teresa Mullen, and they've started a project through ICMRA and ICH, okay, we would like to go with the ultimate goal of being a worldwide CMC approval, one approval, where all the participating countries would just band together, and they've started that with voluntary submissions by companies and just doing it with EMA. What does that result in? It results, right now we have slightly different processes and products in every single country. Why? Because the reviewers want to have a little bit different spec or this or that, or they want to change the process a little bit or something like that. It's a nightmare because then, okay, if we have a shortage in one country, they have to figure out, is it the same drug? Of course it's the same drug, okay, in these other countries, but technically, legally, it is different, all right? So the goal would be eventually to have a data through structured data. And that would mean that all process changes are in a table, okay? And then you can look one by one at each change has a whole row, okay, of all the changes that were made, so you understand the process. Right now, although CEDAR has changed this, but right now you have to go back through a lot of deathless prose, either on the part of the company or part of the reviewers, to figure out what the process changes were over time. Well, in this, as I said, in this modern world, this doesn't make any sense. So I feel, but that doesn't mean the judgment, which is, okay, what should the specifications be? Okay, is this process robust enough? Has it been shown to be reliably produce? That shouldn't go to AI, but we don't even have to worry about that because there's so much opportunity for improvement here before we even get to that point. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. That gets us set off, I think, very nicely, and I think Rahul will kick off the discussion.
Okay, so we'll start with the question to Mark, which is, for you and the work that you've done at Amgen, how is it that you've measured and evaluated the outputs from the system that you've built? How is it that you know they're up to standard and are excited to put them forward?
A couple of things. When we were in the process of writing the code for generating for instance, the clinical study report, we actually went back and took a half dozen or more study reports that were written by the old-fashioned medical writer way of writing the whole thing out based on the protocol and the results, and we compared it to what was AI generated. So we had to tweak some of the algorithms for that, but mostly we were using test and learn procedures to do that. Also, all our clinical study reports still go through the same quality checks that it would if it was completely written by medical writer, and as we have in the old process. So we don't change that because quality is important to make sure that we don't have errors in it. So those are the two ways that we manage it from the beginning, and then same sort of quality check that we do in the end.
So I was really interested by Janet's comments, and we're having a revolution in AI, but I was hearing a call for a revolution in structured data, and I've tried to participate in such revolutions, and they are hard. It's hard to get people excited about structured data. So I'm wondering, for everybody on the panel, what should be the balance between helping AI wade through text and generate text versus we need to move to structured data that statistic algorithms can then go through and bring out the outliers and stuff that then trigger the need for judgment.
Well, maybe you should talk about this first, like in modeling and simulation and the bioequivalence and so forth, because I think that's a good, relatively straightforward example.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Woodcock, to let me go first. So I think structured data for modeling used to be very important. Otherwise, the program's not going to run. However, with the generative AI, it becoming an issue. So we want to take full advantage of AI. So usually, if you have unstructured data, it boosts its performance. But in the same time, you want the decision, recommended by the AI to be solid, to be bias-free. So I think I'm referring to a really impressive FDA draft guidance on the utility of AI. So how to assess the risk of decision made by AI. There are two dimensions. One, the decision consequence. When you have some decision wrong, what's the downstream consequence? The other is how much AI is involved in the decision making. So at the beginning, you maybe have a human AI making decisions together. So then with the data accumulated, experience built, then that we may have comfort trusting the AI's recommendation.
As a follow-up, Liang, I just wanted to ask, is it clear to you how the reviewer would use a co-pilot? With a very capable assistant that's AI, what's the first thing that they would say, I need help, please help me answer this question? Is it clear to you?
It's kind of clear. If I address something wrong, please let me know. So I'm addicted to Copilot right now. So in FDA, people asking whether we can use Copilot, usually it's not encouraged because there's a data issue, there's a security issue. But I think, even in UCSF, what impressed me is the Bay Area culture. The moment I come here, I see Versa. Versa is kind of within the firewall. It's being trained with UCSF data. Then the input output we've seen here is within the firewall. It's really impressive. So am I off topic?
Well, only a little. So you like the idea of a co-pilot, but as a reviewer, putting yourself back in that position, how would you use it?
I will always use it for information intelligence collection at the first time.
Right, because as I said, there's a huge deficit, and Dr. Zhao mentioned this, in knowledge management. So what went before? Okay, if we had this previous situation, how do we know? Okay, you're not going to go through 100 different applications to see if sometime before this happened. Okay, so, without relying on the AI to do your whole review and make your judgment, you're giving the context, the even legal context, the regulatory policy context, the scientific context to the current decision that you are making. And I think this is just going to be tremendous. And when I said structured data, I mean, one of the powers of AI is you don't have to structure it the way you used to have. Like you said, if you had one comma off, okay, the whole program blew up, okay, and so forth. You have to have some kind of agreement on where stuff goes and what that stuff means and so forth and so on. And I think the AI can get better at that. I am not saying we need to essay into replacing human judgment. I'm saying we need to support human judgment with all the facts presented in ways that a human mind is capable of looking at once they're assembled.
If I could follow up on that, and what you said, and Liang and Janet, is the nice thing about when you go through the process of developing algorithms to write AI-generated reports is your data has to be in good format to pull the right data. And so as we went through this process, our data is set up that way, and you need to, it's the logical next step to be able to take that data and submit it directly to the agency without the reports around it. And I think industry is ready for that. I don't think FDA is yet ready to receive that data that way yet, but we've generated it that way. And so it's a matter of being able then to take that next step, and how do we get it to the agency so that they can start reviewing the raw data. And one of the, we started a pilot with the agency that I don't think ever completed, was looking at stability data. So how do you generate stability data? Because that's such data-driven tables and figures. You don't need to write, well, I think this should be 5 years. You can look at the data and it'll tell you what your shelf life should be. And you could just send that to the agency, and you can both be seeing the same data, and you can collaborate on that data. Instead of spending that time you would writing a report, you could spend it collaborating and coming up with the right scientific answer, I believe.
Which maybe if I can put the question directly to Dr. Woodcock, what is it that you think it would take to get the FDA from this document-based place to this data-based place?
Well, I wish I were still there. I'd try to force it. I was a person who got, I got the CEDAR to use. I see Wiley in the audience. I got everybody. They were still using carbon paper when I took over CEDAR. And I forced them and gave them a carrot and a stick for using electronic documents. So we built a first extremely primitive, document repository system, electronic, long ago. And so I just think I see this as the next level. And what it takes is some understanding the vision, and then really somebody to drive that forward, a coalition of people who are committed to this and see the benefits. Because what do I hear? First of all, for those academics in the audience, you deserve more of the information in a form that you don't have. I always say you have to do an archaeological expedition, put on your pith helmet and get everything to find out what happened in any given thing, partly because of confidentiality requirements, but partly all because it's totally non-transparent. And the same thing is true for the FDA reviewers. They don't have any easy way to tell what prior decisions were made and how, and people always used personal knowledge, and that's really a great system when you're doing like 1,000 applications a year or something. So I do think that it is the next level, but it's just going to take some vision and then the desire to get that done. And why? Because the number one complaint I hear from the industry is that the reviewers won't talk to them, the review staff. Why? Because they're writing deathless prose all the time. That's why, right? And they're spending all their time, because not only do the primary reviewers, I talked about all them, write all this deathless prose, then their supervisors are supposed to write, and I got rid of some of that, like when I took over new drugs for a while, I got rid of some of these sequential memos that went up. People were spending, like division directors, spending all their time writing memos, concurring with what their staff did. I'm there, they went 9+ years post-college, and they're not competent of making a decision. So I think, that this would help free up the agency staff to really do the judgment work. That's what's really important, the creativity, the judgment, deep thinking about things. And the more you get into like just writing stuff and blah, 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 then you're not doing that.
I wanted to ask kind of a practical question. There might be people in the audience thinking about, okay, maybe I should move my organization. What about this? And this has come up several times. Maybe starting with Mark, but really I'd like to hear from everybody about this, the data security and privacy issue. Are you sending Amgen data out on the internet to a maybe trusted or pretty much trusted vendor, or is it, or is it all in-house? Similarly for the FDA, what are the concerns about having the reviewers use tools that might be sitting in a server farm that's not in White Oak?
Most of our data is in-house, but when as I said earlier, one of the platforms we're using is a cloud-based platform, Cumulus, and that has all the security. You know, our organization had a look at the security. They looked at it, and I think they've also gone through some of the governments around the world. So it has to be secure because it is the privacy laws that you're talking about.
So are the LLMs that you're using
The
in-house?
LLMs, the LLMs. The LLMs that we're using are proprietary. They're in-house that we've working with the AI companies, but they're on our side of the firewall.
So I'm going to guess that that's a fairly substantial investment in hardware and infrastructure?
Luckily, I don't have to pay that bill.
Well, so that same exact issue comes up for the FDA colleagues.
Yeah, well, I've recently talked to the FDA CIO about this, and he's very concerned that they cannot sustain financially, the investment required. And that's why I was always interested in mechanisms like a Cumulus, where regulators could share one side or other side of the firewall and not bear the entire cost. But I feel there's a lot of denial at FDA. They'd like to keep their own stuff, and maybe each center have its own instance in all these things, and they're just fiscal realities that's not possible. So I think that's a looming issue that's going to have to be dealt with.
Well, we promised Q&A, so we might. There's microphones at the bottom of the two staircases. I'll let Rahul get things started. If you have a question. Oh well, we have a question, so go for it.
Stephen Gilbert, Professor of Medical Device Regulatory Science, Dresden, Germany. So I asked my question on posters 5 and 6 on this theme. I asked my question as an enthusiast, but slightly cautious enthusiast. It is like I'm going to assume, with relation to Janet Woodcock's point, that we're going to remain in deathless prose as part of the process going forward. We're not going to instantly switch to all structured data, and even if we did, the structuring would have to become infinitely extensible for many complex products. But we could be in a situation where the product itself could be a generative AI coming from a provider like OpenAI. I'll give them as an example, where the documentation, the deathless prose from the company is created by GPT-4 or another large language model, which is then going to the reviewer, the FDA, interpreted with copilots based on the same foundation models, with panels using the same foundation models, and later audit using all the same foundation models. Could we be in a situation of the AI reviewing itself? And when we talk about copilots, we look at the analogy of medicine. To what extent does the copilot function as a decision support system? And to what extent can humans function in decision-making with decision support systems? In medicine, badly. In the case of a wrong answer from a large language model, the human is directed to agree with the wrong answer the more they get support from it. Very bad combinations in decision-making. Two things go together.
Well, that goes right to it. Thank you for the question. Do we have thoughts about this? And Rahul, you can act as a panelist as well.
Maybe I can start then by making a couple of comments here. I think this gets to the heart of some of the issues we've seen with like deployment of technology in increasingly important places where it's a question of, okay, well, how do you trust the output of some of these tools, and how do you not blindly trust? How do you couple that with this sort of human judgment piece, right? And this is where increasingly, I think a lot of this feels like both a system design and a user interface problem. Vis-a-vis system design, there's this question of how do you raise levels of confidence that, hey, these AI systems have this much confidence, this is where this data was sourced from, this is where these conclusions are coming from in the first instance, and then surface that to the people that are using these tools in ways that lets them say, that doesn't lead to blind trust, but in fact leads to verification and leads to care. And that is a bit more of a user interface problem. So I wish I had more answers rather than just pointers, but I do think that as AI systems get more powerful in general, these sorts of user interface and oversight questions are ones that we as a company and we as a society will need to give a lot of thought to.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think as far as FDA reviewing AI applications, this is a different animal because previously you could look at the design of the device. This is a black box and you have stuff in and stuff out. And so I think that's going to be how you evaluate performance characteristics is going to be fundamentally different than how you have evaluated performance characteristics of most medical devices. As far as the bias introduced and tendency toward wrong answers, I completely agree with you, Rahul. I think the interfaces, user interfaces need to be structured so that it isn't God in the Ten Commandments telling you the answer, okay? If you reframe the way you present it to the user, I think you can prompt the user to use their own judgment and make it very clear that's what's being asked, that this is a support. If you report it out, and I see this in my own work that I'm doing, if you report it out as an answer, that's a bad idea, I think, because that introduces a huge amount of cognitive bias.
I'm going to go back and forth between, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Lewis Hart from Onyx Newsroom. We make biotech news. So my question is this, which is that the motivation of this panel, I think, was mainly to do with the fact that AI has some risks, and then the outcome has been, it's amazing, everyone's for it. So if I could sort of get you to focus on the former. I think the main problem with AI that people worry about is hallucination. And what I understand is that the great progress that you've made, Mark, Rahul, everyone, is from agentic workflows. And we're very much in the age of agentic workflows now in AI. For those who don't know, it basically just means AI which can prompt itself, and you might have a 10 cycle or a 100 cycle. So here's my question. If there's a hallucination early on in the process, maybe it's a little bit like the pee underneath the princess's mattress, are you getting more worried or less worried about hallucination in the age of agentic AI?
Maybe I can start here. A quick thought on hallucinations. These are getting better over time. We have a benchmark called Simple QA. On this, we've seen like error rates with recent models drop substantially. Still much room to go. Point two is like this idea of compounding errors, right? And I think there is some question here about like in systems of these agents or in systems of people interacting with one another, if we take that analogy, do errors compound or do errors self-correct? And I think that this is like an empirical property of these systems that we end up being able to study. And so my comment here would be these agentic systems, we can study them, we can study their characteristics like others, we can study their internals like others and see where that ends us up. And in addition to that, I'd say that, the technology we have today is remarkable and is nowhere near as good as the technology we will have in 2 or 3 years' time. And so I hope for continued progress on all of these fronts.
And from our perspective, I think, as you said, the technology is getting better, but we still do our quality checks. When we did our first initiation of this, and we did it both from the standard way, the way we used to do it, and then we did it by AI, and we had the same reviewers review these documents. They were making changes, human reviewers, those changes were actually less accurate. We went back and we said, well, we had to go back to the AI version. So AI is often, what we're finding is actually often better than the errors you see when humans are doing the work.
If I may add to that, I know there is potential for catastrophic errors in certain applications, right? But we're in kind of collective denial about how error-prone humans are. and so we're holding up to a standard like that doesn't actually exist in many cases.
If I may chime in also, since it's an important topic, for regulatory use, there's a new term like a credibility assessment plan. Hopefully, when you have something to do with regulatory, you are most likely to be encouraged to discuss that plan ahead of time with the FDA. to get the agreement. I just want to add in.
And then actually, I think relevant to both the first two questions is that there is an emerging ecosystem of competing and different LLMs, and it may be that you would want to keep track of which LLMs are doing what, and even consider LLMs as individual agents and run the same analysis with a couple different ones, and just because perhaps, I don't know this for a fact, the hallucination tendencies will be different in different systems, and therefore you can have some self-correction there, but it's a very active area of research. I'm going to keep moving.
Hi, Aruna Donta Bhaktuni, regkey.ai. So question that I have for Mark is, can you actually reflect on, first of all, Amgen, that's great what you guys have done with use of AI and automating. That's the future, all of us know. My question is more so for a company like Amgen and many of the big pharma companies who have the money to spend. They can, but we are also aware that pharma industry mostly consists of these smaller, mid-sized companies who may not be able to afford to spend. Can you just reflect on what was an approximate cost that went into the work that right now we are talking about number of weeks and months of work that got trimmed down, right? Obviously, on the bigger scheme of things, it looks great, but if you can please reflect on that.
Yeah. So I actually don't know all the costs because it comes from the IT department. It doesn't come out of my budget, but it is a central budget. You have a couple of things. To do this, you actually have to have agreement from the top of the organization down. I know a lot of companies have done try to do AI in one document or two document. What we want to do is the whole thing. And so it does take a lot of resources. I think it could give a company a competitive advantage to be able to do this because you could get your drug to the agency and approved quicker. But I think in the long run, I think these are going to be off-the-shelf type of documents eventually. I don't think it's going to be, maybe the larger companies will do their own automation and use of AI for clinical studies report and so forth. But I know there's other companies already out there that are doing AI for regulatory intelligence. There's going to be a lot doing it for clinical study reports and all the rest of the documents. So I think the price will come down significantly when you're buying off the shelf. And I don't think that's too far away. I don't think the advantage of us doing it now is going to last long, but because I think the off-the-shelf solutions are going to be there.
If I
Follow-up,
don't mind,
yes.
just a follow-up question, and I think this is more on the follow-up of what was spoken earlier as well. From our understanding, because we have been using AI and generating a regulatory intelligence and a regulatory platform, our understanding from our AI experts is not one model serves everything. There are certain AI models that are good with data. There are certain AI models that are good with writing. So maybe it has to be a combination of different pieces to actually create something that would be useful. And maybe Rahul can comment on that.
It's certainly true that different models have different capabilities. I think right now, for example, just to speak to our models, GPT-4o is really great, for example, in the multimodal realm, has great speech-to-speech capabilities. O1 is very smart, needs to be prompted carefully to get the very most out of it. Whether this will there's another important difference. Some models have different affordances, right? Access to tools, can use a calculator to not make basic math errors, do this kind of thing. I think there is some question as to how and whether this will continue. I think we'll continue to see a really diverse ecosystem. I also think that there's a real incentive to have models that are capable of doing very many things themselves, and so this is a little bit more of a watch this space.
Over here, thank you.
Hello, my name is Zhao, and we're building data insights platform for medical devices at Rec Hero. So my question is, I think So to be honest, we're using LLMs from OpenAI, and we want to encourage medical device startup innovation. But one problem we face is that there are only certain limited public data available. 510K summaries, they're only like limited length, and the databases. So my question is, as FDA, how do you see or what are the ways you can facilitate better public data availability to really encourage medical device innovation?
Well, the lack of public availability is a convoluted problem that, I struggled with for extremely long time, at least in the drug area, not in the device area. But basically, it's kind of all the same. There's industry confidentiality. Then there's the issue of whatever FDA releases must be redacted. And once I remember we were sued for $3.4 billion because some little phrases in huge documents that were released shouldn't have been, okay? We got that settled, fortunately. We could have bankrupted the agency. I tried a pilot whereby companies, because in Europe they have to release some of the data, although I know the devices, it's not true in Europe because they don't go through, but for drugs they have to release the data, so we tried to release the same things that were released similarly in Europe. Turned out that our laws of privacy in the United States are different than Europe, and we got the head of the IRB, or the signature in the IRB was released in the United States. Well, that caused a tremendous uproar, although you would think the IRB would feel free to own up to the fact that they signed off on the protocol, but no, they were beside themselves about that. And then other human privacy information is different in Europe and the U.S., and they're incompatible. And so it didn't work. The pilot didn't work. The company felt unhappy about it, and so forth. So it's really Congress would have to set forth a different set of parameters, I think, for data release for this to work. FDA can't, it would have to come from the company's redacted information. And then FDA doesn't like that because maybe the companies will redact too much. But FDA can't do that redaction. It's too much because there's, all this deathless prose along with the data and everything. It would all have to be redacted. So, it's a really difficult problem, and I think academics as well as companies struggle with this.
I think this will be our last question before the break, and I apologize to those who've been standing because I'm sure the questions would have been great.
I'll try to cover for everyone then. I'm Ari Caroline. I'm a co-founder of Weave Bio. We're a regulatory automation platform. Hey. And we're working with some of the panelists in the committees today. First of all, before I forget, Russ, we'd love to show you a prototype model for calculating maximally tolerated starting dose using an agentic workflow, but we'll follow up separately. Rahul, my question is primarily for you. We worked closely with OpenAI at the very beginning, one of the first zero data retention agreements. We've gone back and forth internally in terms of the need to create internal models that can be standalone inside a firewall versus have reliable ways of hitting the endpoints. One of the challenges is if anyone's being realistic about this, you're not going to keep up with OpenAI in terms of how you update your models. So my question is, what role does OpenAI see for itself in guaranteeing that level of security and zero data retention? We're working, primarily in INDs right now, and that's some of the most sensitive material that any drug company can have of, what they're about to put into clinical trials. Been good partners initially in setting up this zero data retention policy, but would like to know what you're thinking going forward.
Yeah, happy to answer. On the data privacy point, I think this is important to the company. It's a place where I know we've put in a fair bit of investment. As you say, we have these we do sometimes do these zero data retention sorts of agreements with individual organizations. And so it's an area of focus. I'm maybe not the best positioned person to speak to this because this is a different part of the organization, but it's something that's come up in a lot of conversations and is important. Maybe also let me speak in personal capacity to this model ecosystem and open source side of things. There's a few closed source model providers that are moving very quickly. I think that the open source ecosystem has also had has made substantial progress over the course of the past year. We now have open source models that are a similar level to the original GPT-4 model, and so open source is certainly not to be discounted entirely. I think it's a little bit of a question of this trade-off between ease of use and access to what is at the most cutting edge, and then also having that sort of full internal control. And I think that these are important decisions for individual organizations to make. And on our side, we will continue to do what we can on the privacy and security fronts.
With that, I would like to thank the panel and the panelists, and thank you all.